Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Eric Bauer with us, an acquisition entrepreneur who went from working in tech at Amazon for 10 years to acquiring Turner Hat Company, a wholesale hat company based out of Alabama. Very excited to hear Eric's story today. Eric's great to have you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Eric, tell us about your background. You worked in tech. How did you, decide to get into, business ownership and specifically buying a business?
Yeah, so I worked in at Amazon for 10 years. I graduated from the University of Washington and um kind of fell into the role. Like it wasn't something I was really looking for directly. But had got some good advice from my parents right after graduating to kind of take it and go with it. And like I would say most of the peers that I started with all thought we were going to be there from 2 years and then go and do something else. A lot of them did do that. I was one of I like probably 3 or 4% that stayed that long and was there in a bunch of different businesses. So I started in straight retail and personal computers, owning accounts and managing P&Ls in that business, and then moved into logistics with baby products. So I was responsible for figuring out how to ship everything from a pacifier to a crib at the lowest possible cost to the customer. And then the last 5 years I was there, I was in grocery. So trying to build up our grocery business. We have different physical store locations across the country, and then also our direct from warehouse to customer Amazon Fresh business. And so worked in almost every aspect of that program as we it morphed and changed over those 5 years. But within the last like 2 years there, we'd gone through so many iterations in Fresh and had taken started to take a different approach with what I'd call like Amazon startup or like growth businesses, where they became much less free form. I because they had to. Like Amazon was a multi-trillion-dollar company. They couldn't afford to just like run wild like that anymore. But I was looking to go back to something that was similar to when I started there, where I really had like end-to-end control over what I was buying, over the customers I was talking to, over the suppliers I was working with, and had heard about entrepreneurship through acquisition a couple years previously, but was still at that time really like enjoying the work I was doing at Amazon. But kind of refreshed my knowledge of it. The space had changed a little bit since I looked into it in the late 2010s, and really just dove in at the end of 2022, started 2023, and started searching there, and uh, found Turner Hat about a year later, and then took a couple months to close the deal and moved on down to Alabama. So it was,
No, thank you for that quick summary. I'm
yeah.
curious, in terms of what made you decide to pull the trigger, was it really that, I guess at Amazon or in tech that you started feeling like, it was no longer a startup and it just had grown so much that you weren't taking ownership? Was there anything else that made you, I guess, decide to want to actually just go pursue entrepreneurship?
Yeah, it was something I'd always liked the thought of, and I've always worked like I guess I think fairly hard, and I think what I started to see the more and more I was there is like less returns to that effort. And so I would do more. I keep trying to strive to do as well as I could, and that became in my opinion like maybe less and less important as I moved higher and higher up at Amazon. And the things that I thought were really important for driving the business became less weighted to some of the like political stuff. And I think this is a common thing for anyone who moves up in a big organization. And I just didn't want to like I didn't want to grow my skill set in being like a good political player in an organization. Like I wanted to continue to learn how to operate and operate like at full scale end to end. And so that was what really drove me to it is one like really returns to my own effort to some extent. Like I can realize all the work that I put in, which is it has been true and is a really like rewarding part of doing this. But also like wanting to refocus the skill set on like truly operating a business rather than kind of the networking and all that aspect, which is like great for me personally, but like not something I professionally like to be proficient in.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess, when you started seriously, starting, I guess, searching, what were the types of deals you were looking at? What was your kind of thesis going into this? If there was one,
Yeah.
were there specific types of businesses that you were targeting?
Yeah, I was looking for kind of the traditional criteria for an acquisition. So I wanted high recurring revenue. I wanted a not like concentrated customer base, so like well diversified from that perspective. Um, I wanted things that weren't cyclical, which or like pumped up, which was probably the biggest factor that I had to screen for was whether or not like the results that these companies carried forward in 2023 were real or just a pandemic bump. And that was probably the most qualitative criterion that I had to look through. But it was really companies that fit in that field. So things like in-home services, I looked at some deals around like plumbing and HVAC and ran into some of the things that a lot of people will tell you about those in terms of having to be licensed to do them or having a key man risk there when you're the person who holds the license or the bill like has the opportunity to leave. There's a bunch of risk there. I looked into manufacturing. I thought and still think it's kind of bearing out that manufacturing in the US has some upside and is kind of an under penetrated market right now. The problem with that is any manufacturer at my like size I was looking for was almost entirely concentrated on one or two big companies. So like a lot on the West Coast, you saw like a lot of Boeing and aerospace manufacturers that had one main customer, and if their part stopped fitting that plane, like you were kind of out of luck. So the manufacturing thesis didn't work great after I spent some more time on it. And then I did look into like retail goods and in those kind of areas, but almost every single one I saw. This was right around the time when interest rates were trying to tick up. Valuations on companies should have been coming down, but all these companies were stuck on this like 5x valuation idea and they weren't really budging from it. And they all wanted credit for their 2023 numbers and they wanted to use those going forward. And I had to have a lot of kind of just not just frank conversations with owners and brokers about whether or not they think this is really like realistic long-term trajectory for their businesses. And a lot of them, all of them to their credit said yes. I don't know if that was all true. And I wasn't willing to take the risk on their behalf. So screening for someone that didn't see what I thought was a non-long-term like pandemic bump was the big thing for me. And I think part of the reason that Turner Hat fit that criterion is because they're so well diversified that even though you saw a lot of run up in like the home goods space, for example, there were also a lot of like retailers that didn't do very well through that period in smaller towns, and so they saw like a decent size bump, but nothing crazy like the 100% growth that I saw in some hardware stores I looked at.
Got it. No, that's super interesting, and I'm sure we'll dive in more.
Yeah.
But with that 1 year period that you were searching, were you doing that full time, part time? What did that look like?
Yeah, I was part-time. So I was still working at Amazon. So I was doing it nights and weekends. And I had ended up in a role where I'd come back from sabbatical. So Amazon allowed me to take a 3 month sabbatical. I came back from that and was really just transparent with my manager, who I'd known for a really long time, that I wanted to take a less all-encompassing role at Amazon, I guess is how I would put it. And a lot of people were starting to go in that direction. So they were reorganizing roles so that they were only 40 hours a week rather than kind of like a 60 or 70 type thing. And so that allowed me time on nights and weekends to go and inform kind of my process. And that was really the thing that I needed to get up and running. So I set up like my own little CRM, made a database of brokers and all their deal types, got them into like just an inbox filter where I could go through them really quickly. And then the ones that I didn't get emails on, I would just check their listings or reach out to them every so often based on how relevant they were to me. And so getting that process up was the most time consuming thing. And I think a lot of people find this that I've talked to where um they go set up this process that takes however many hours per week, but then especially around holidays, around like summer break, you don't see a lot of deal flow, and so you kind of just like twiddle your thumbs and start to like stretch your criteria and like look at deals that really don't make sense. But if I could have, like looking back, been more strict at it and really spent like just a couple hours per week in those slow periods reviewing deals and kind of passing out the ones that didn't meet my criteria. But the other like important caveat that I use when I tell people when I did my search was I only looked at broker deals. I wasn't approaching or going door to door to business owners and asking if they were interested in selling. I didn't. I looked through some of the data on like differences in valuations between brokered and unbrokered deals, and the difference just wasn't enough where I was willing to leave my full-time job and try to make that and try to get that that kind of arbitrage. So I just went with brokered deals, and it saved me a lot of time. I think it saved me a lot of like kind of heartache, and I never dealt with the other like risks of or sellers backing out or any of that kind of stuff. Most people that I talked to, by the time we got to LOI, like I felt really confident that if the deal criteria and the structure worked, we'd go forward with it. I was never like worried about shaky sellers or anything like that. So it worked really well for me, but it's not the same for everyone.
Yeah, no, I feel like for a lot of first time searchers, it's just so much of a lift to even
Hmm.
like run, cold email outreach or cold calling or building relationship with with sellers and even finding them. It's just so much work that
Yeah.
it oftentimes like doesn't really make sense if this is your
Yeah.
first time doing it and you have a full-time job. You can only
Yeah.
pursue this
And my
part-time.
and my criteria was so wide where I wasn't like I didn't have a particular sector that I was looking in. I wasn't geographically focused for the most part. I was trying to stay coastal and then eventually like folded on that. But where I the list of people I would have reached out to would have just been thousands of different business owners, and I wouldn't have had the opportunity to go and like actually customize that pitch. And based on the emails that like I get in, if I get an email that says like "Dear Ma'am" or "Dear Sir" or whatever it is, like I just don't respond to it. And I kind of felt that the owners that I was reaching out to like would feel the same way. So I didn't feel like I could really give a good effort to a like targeted, personalized, non-brokered search.
Did you, was there a certain size business you were looking at? Were you trying to like replace your income? Were you trying to find a business that you could grow? What did that kind of look like?
Yeah, so this is kind of a hindsight thing for me too, in terms of what I was like really looking for. I wanted to go after the biggest business I possibly could. So I was looking for something in the realm of like $2 million in EBITDA, $10 million like acquisition price approximately, and would structure it through debt and some like personal investment. And the more like I looked at those, the more I saw those valuations stretch, and so you were getting into 6 and 7x EBITDA, and you were competing with private equity firms and all these other kind of folks. And I couldn't find anything that was penciling out for me the way that I wanted to, but I wanted that like leverage on the debt. Like I wanted to have a um, uh, big operating company that I could play around with some of the departments in and restructure and make it a little bit more efficient. Turner was the complete opposite. It was on the very, very low end of the spectrum from what I was expecting. The deal price was around 2 million, and we do about 300 to $400,000 in EBITDA depending on the year. So it was really, really low on that end. But I saw growth opportunity in the e-commerce space the more I looked at the way that they were doing their business model with like direct to these small mom and pop stores. It is a model that scales really well, especially with like some relevant technology that they were lacking. And so those are all changes that we're able to make going forward. And the other, in hindsight, the benefit of that is it was small and manageable enough where I could do some of the like post acquisition investment myself and pay for some of the growth that we had coming up, and I had to take out new loans and then to wait. And so that's been a really big boon that I never would have thought pre-acquisition to like look for something smaller that I could invest more in. But now that I've done it and I have control over like we have a real product roadmap, we have real things we're developing, and we can afford to pay for all that. Like that's I think a lot more exciting than like worrying about how we're gonna make payroll because our cash flow is so tight because of some debt liability.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of people, I feel like the first year or two after post-acquisition, working capital becomes such a challenge.
Yeah, yeah,
And just like making payroll can be hard. So if you know, you're not counting for that. So that makes a lot of sense. I guess, before we proceed, like let's talk about Turner Hat Company and what do you guys
yeah.
do? We hadn't really spoken about it yet, but tell us about the business, what you liked about it then, what you continue to like about it now.
Yeah. So Turner Hat has been in business for 30, almost 35 years. It'll be 35 years next year. And they were a wholesaler of hats. Is really kind of as simple as it gets. And so we contract out manufacturing in Mexico and China primarily. And then they use our branding, our styles, and then we sell those to different wholesalers primarily. So most of our customers are in the hardware space. So think like an Ace Hardware or a smaller kind of regional hardware chain. Think of a Pilot Travel Center is like another space, a space that we're in. So a bunch of independent travel places around the country. And then we also do kind of other places we expect to find hats. So like lawn garden, touristy areas and those kind of things, and work with those independent boutiques. And product wise, we are 100% focused on like wide brim hats, which I've also had to start to like clarify with folks that like it's not caps. We don't do that kind of thing. Caps are really the unique niche with the wide brim hats is that they're hard to pack and hard to distribute. And so folks don't like it's not an easy way to get into kind of a distribution game. They're bulky, they're easily damaged. There's a lot of problems with shipping these things around that Turner built some internal specialization around that I was interested in using. And it's a niche that like honestly a lot of folks just aren't interested in playing with because of the distribution challenges. So that's kind of like our special niche. And then we do mostly like I call them leisure styles. So some golf hats, some things you wear while you're riding a mower, and then our one of our biggest segments is actually like Western felts and Western straws, which I coming from Seattle like had no concept of how widespread they were, I guess. So like I
Right.
knew folks wore them, but I didn't know where. And we sell cowboy straws in every state in the country. We sell them year round. We sell them outside of major cities. We sell them inside of major cities. Like it's really a much more ubiquitous product than I expected. And like the more I learned, the more I liked this idea of we're really only penetrating a small segment of the independent store population out there. We're underpenetrated in some of the bigger chains, so there's a lot of upside opportunity for it. It was a lot of it was just figuring out the right mechanisms to go and get that growth. So we're that's what we're working on next year.
That's no, that's super interesting. I love these like these niches where you just wouldn't know that like,
Yeah,
the types of customers, like the both I guess from the B2B perspective, that's always like as well as the end customer. It's so interesting. I would have never
yeah.
known that about wide brimmed hats, but
And you were kind of saying this like as before we recorded, but about like looking at these different companies to invest in. But it was that was I think my favorite part about that was my favorite part about the search is of like looking at this company making a couple $1 million a year and $500,000 in EBITDA and being like, this is a company that exists. Like this company that there was one that I looked at that refurbished EKG machines and made a really good profit doing it. And I was like, it was one owner and they contracted out to like other folks around the country who could repair them. And it was just like wild these little niches that exist around the world and how where there's a market for these types of things. So
no,
um
100%. And when you said hats, I was like, I know they sell hats in a lot of stores, but I couldn't like tell you where, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah. Like where would
it's
you actually get one? If you
that's super interesting.
yeah.
And was this a first deal that you went under LOI with and obviously acquired, or did you, you know, you had a 1 year period where you were searching before you actually went under LOI on this one.
Yeah,
So
there were two others where we got to LOI and then we never signed the LOI. So there was another one that was it was based in Washington. It was actually going to be convenient for me. It was a chain of men's salons basically. So it was a barbershop chain, but they had a more elevated experience. And that kind of fit the boxes of like people always need haircuts, semi non-discretionary. They were obviously like a higher price point, but it was a really interesting model. They ultimately were looking for an owner or a purchaser who had experience in that industry, and there are tons of semi-independent and independent barbers out there who like would have made a better owner for that organization. So we ultimately like went our separate ways on that. And then there were a couple of there was one in particular food distribution businesses that I got closer to that kind of mirrored some of my experience at Amazon Fresh, and I knew kind of like the market and how it worked. And I specifically worked at produce while I was there, and produce distribution ends up being a good business because obviously like it's high reoccurrence, produce expires, that kind of thing. And so I looked at a couple business like that and then got close on one. But ultimately we couldn't get to terms on LOI or on pricing. They wanted something like 7x EBITDA
wow.
on a distribution business, which again was coming from this world where like that was possible when interest rates were zero, and you could maybe wasn't a good idea, but you could make it work. And the harsh reality of 10% interest rates on a 7B loan like wouldn't let that happen. So that was
Yeah, no, no, that's super interesting. I guess, you know, one follow-up is how did you get comfortable with buying a business out of state? You know, obviously you were looking at some closer to you and that would have been preferable, but you know, what was your thought process behind that? Because I think a lot of people think about like, do I need to be 20-minute drive from this
yeah.
place, 50-mile
I
radius?
I would this is another thing where I think I underestimated the impact of it. Like I thought this would be totally fine. I have always like and this is like I traveled for work a lot. I did the digital nomad thing during the pandemic. I have spent like a lot of time just like out traveling by myself, and thought it would be like fine, I guess. Like it never really crossed my mind as like a maybe this is a bad idea. And then the first time I flew out there, it was all right. I went back a couple times and made the acquisition. And I think the third time I came back from Seattle to Alabama, like it really hit me that like this is like a long-term thing. Like I'm here for like a while, and like we can move the warehouse, we can do all these other things, but like this is not a 6 month like I'm back home kind of thing. And that kind of hit me at the time like a ton of bricks. And I never like regretted the decision, but it was definitely something I maybe would have waited a little bit heavier in my search, or at least prepared myself for. But I was so laser focused on getting the deal done that I kind of ignored those like qualitative factors of like factors of life or quality of life or all those kind of things. And I think the other thing that I looked for that helped to mitigate it was a really strong internal management team. And so we've got some really good folks at the business that can handle the day to day when I'm not there, and we can communicate really effectively over Teams or over chat. So I am it actually now is beneficial to be gone for a week or two at a time, where I can put my head down and focus on more strategic work, and then there's a literal list of like Eric's problems that they have like stacked and ready for me when I come back in. So it's a good like it allows me some freedom to like think more outside the box, but then also still like have a hand in the day-to-day operations.
No, that's super interesting. I'm sure I'm gonna ask you more, you know, about,
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
post acquisition, but I guess before even getting there, what was diligence like? What happened after you signed the LOI? Did you go get an SBA 7A loan to buy the business? Like, was there some
Yep.
seller financing involved? How did you structure that deal with the seller, and what terms did you guys arrive on?
Yeah, we did a 7A loan, and no seller financing. We discussed it a little bit, but we ended up negotiating more working capital than doing a seller finance deal, which was kind of fine for me either way. I worked with First National for my 7A loan, and they were recommended by the broker that I worked with. They were awesome. Like I actually every 7A broker that I worked with was super strong. I can't say enough good things about the program. And especially like now also looking back at it, I'm happy that I had someone with like really strict requirements on what we could or couldn't do in terms of your DSCR ratio and all those other things because like I was kind of alluding to earlier, like I would love to push the envelope in terms of what I could afford and what made sense for a business. But having those criteria kind of brought me back down to earth, which I now appreciate. So I went through that process almost immediately after signing the LOI. That was the longest, like the long pole in the process. It took about 4 months and we were doing it during the holiday, so it added some time on there. And then I outsourced my financial due diligence to a contractor who I met on Due Dilio, and he did a great job doing mostly like the verification of like funds and revenue and all that kind of work, which all turned out really clean. The brokers that I worked with were like very transparent in the way that the books were represented, everything, nothing surprising came from any of that due diligence. And then the other kind of big milestone was at the time I signed the LOI and I had kind of prepared my manager for this as we're getting more serious about it. That was when I was going to formally like resign from Amazon and spend full time doing the due diligence because I didn't want to outsourcing like the real like nitty gritty of the business wasn't
Yeah.
something I felt super comfortable doing. And so while the folks that I contracted out the financial due diligence to were doing their thing, I was going through all the vendor relationships, all the customer relationships, all the customer retention rate, all those details that I had like some visibility to, but not the full books. And making sure that they all kind of met what I was looking for. We asked and did some like renegotiating during that period, as you typically do, around mostly around like inventory valuations and those type of things, product that wasn't selling like it should have been. Um, but really like not that painful. I was shocked because I do not have a finance background. I don't have a PE background. I have a strictly operational background. And I was surprised by how willing people were to just help on questions like that. Everyone from the like SBA loan officers to the brokers to like personal connections who had been through the process before and sites like Search Funder, like all like really helpful for answering some of these questions. Um, but getting through it was fairly painless from a like ambiguity perspective. From a obviously it was a ton of work to go through all the books, but I felt really confident. I felt a lot more confident post due diligence than I did like going into it, which is obviously what you should feel after your due diligence period. But it was a pretty good like process for me. I really dreaded that because it was the thing I knew the least about.
Yeah, I know that's interesting. It's so smooth sailing. I feel like that's not the usual experience, and it seems like you were still very thorough. Whereas a lot of, first time buyers sometimes just like kind of fly through diligence, if you will, and maybe skip some of these key steps. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you did it the right way. I'm curious, when you did the site visits, what were you kind of looking for there? How did you approach those?
Yeah. The site visit stories are kind of wild. So I was looking just for the like the quality of the building that they were in, like whether or not it was suitable for our purposes. They were kind of overspaced. The real estate out there is as you expect, like pretty inexpensive. And so we have a really good size building that's gonna allow for future growth. But I was looking at the condition of the building. It's not the most up to date. It's not the most lovely looking. You can check it out on Google Maps. But it does its job well. And I was looking at the condition of the inventory. I was looking at some of the staff policies and all that kind of work. I didn't get a chance to meet the staff until after we'd signed the purchase agreement, and so I wanted to do as much pre-diligence on that to understand like employee records and reviews and all those kind of things. And that's what I was like really looking for when I was going in there. The kind of reason it was odd was it's 20 minutes outside of Auburn, which is 2 hours south of Atlanta. There was no cell phone reception anywhere near the building. And it was previously, we have fixed it now, but the address was listed at a house in this tiny little town, not at the warehouse, which is down the road. And so I was circling the block in the night, like looking for something that I could not find, trying to call the broker, and in a town of like 2,000 people that was getting dark really quickly. And I was about to just like drive home and then I got outside of the town limits, got cell phone reception. They kind of gave me the way to get back there. And I came to what was a very spooky warehouse in the middle of the night, and it still is a spooky warehouse when the all the lights are turned off. So it was a that was my first like, what am I doing here kind of moment. Like, how did
I
I end
love
up in
that.
this place? And I've had some of those since, but that was the first one where it was like, I can just pack my things and go home right now. Like I like, and I'm glad I did it. But it was very much like a every time someone comes in for a job interview or anything now, I have this like very long list of directions and like places where your cell phone service will cut out, just so that it's something that we deal with. It's we make the most.
That is hilarious. I love that. I mean, those are the stories that make the journey
Yeah,
memorable. So
absolutely.
I love that. I'm curious because, a lot of searchers don't buy businesses with inventory for the first time because they like aren't sure how to really diligence it and how to go about figuring out, is this in good condition, et cetera, et cetera. How did you go about navigating that? I mean, like you obviously had a little bit of a background in that. But how did you go about just, uh, I guess, diligencing the inventory and then renegotiating it?
Yeah, that was one of the parts where I think I was lucky on with just the sellers representing themselves fairly. They were really honest about they were honest but optimistic about some of the inventory that wasn't turning very well, and you could see that in the numbers really easily. The thing that I was most worried about was like unsellable inventory due to damage that they were passing off as sellable. And we did some spot checks, but I felt really good. We did spot checks first on the product quality. So I went through and looked at a couple thousand hats to make
Ow.
sure, which like is kind of a drop in the bucket, but it like you kind of go through them. And we also like similarly do our own like inspection internally. So we receive product, we sticker tag and inspect it before it goes out. Our whole like deal is to be like really lightweight for the end customer so they don't get damaged hats all the time. But when they were telling me this, I was kind of thinking like this can't be too hard to go through a couple thousand if you guys are doing this every day. And so I it took me much longer than it does take my team. But I wanted to make sure that I was looking at all the styles, that there were some products that were like we have oilcloths that are a little bit more sensitive. We have felt hats that are a little bit more sensitive. I wanted to make sure I was doing a good sample of all those. But all in all, between that and then doing a full count on a couple of lines. So we had the QuickBooks numbers, we had the actual like physical inventory, comparing a couple of those lines to see they matched up and doing some sampling there. All in all, that took a weekend to do. It wasn't like it was annoying, but it wasn't like a full scale whole count of the warehouse and an investigation of every single product. And like I said, I had built or the sellers I say should have or built trust with me over the time that they were pretty honest doing people. And the customer reach outs that I did also led credence to that. So I talked to a couple customers. They had told me they had never had any problems with the hats, like all that kind of stuff. So I think I understand why people are skeptical about it because it can like you can just end up with a lot of junk, especially if you don't know what you're buying. But they're not super complicated products, so I felt pretty good about inspecting them myself.
Yeah, no, it's that's great that the seller let you speak to their customers, by the way, because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of times sellers are really sensitive about that. I guess rightly so in many
Oh
situations if
yeah.
the deal's not going to close. So that's great.
Yeah. They because they had so many like independents, it wasn't like I was talking to their biggest like corporate customers. I was talking to a couple of the ones that they had known, especially locally in town for a long time. And it was under the guise of like, hey, like I'm doing some independent work for Turner Hat Company, like that kind of thing. And so we minimized it, but it was something that was important to me because I mean, obviously, like we live and die by our reputation. There's a bunch of other hat distributors out there that can do the same thing. So,
No, that's interesting. And what was the transition that you negotiated with the sellers? You mentioned no seller financing. I guess you
yep.
weren't worried that the seller is just gonna kind of ghost you and disappear. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
what kind of transition did you guys negotiate?
There were two sellers. There were partners, 50/50 partners in the business, and we negotiated the same, like kind of staggered 4 month or 4 week transition period. So um one of them was remote. He worked in Texas, and we just were on customer introductory customer calls. He owned sales, so we were on customer calls, meeting with the different sales rep team that we work with, and then going back and forth through like customer history and how to navigate trade shows and all those other things for the first four weeks. And then the second 4 weeks were with uh, the operations side of the business. So the owner that ran the warehouse, he also ran the warehouse for those 4 weeks I was transitioning with the sales owner. So he did a total of 8 weeks post transition or post acquisition, and learned uh some of it. Like at this point he had offloaded a lot of like the day-to-day work to his operations manager, or he was an accounts clerk at that time, but offloaded a lot of that work. So I was doing mostly like inventory and supplier introductions from him, and that was thankfully like really easy for me to pick up. That was well within my background at Amazon in a couple of different areas. So
Yeah.
I knew the way that he was thinking about inventory. I had my own ideas about how to think about it as well. And it wasn't that hard. It was just learning that like the nitty-gritty details of how many hats come in a box, how many can fit in the trailer, how many like can like how often they ship, and Chinese New Year, and
Yeah.
one manufacturer that we use you can't order during the months of May to June because they get bugs in their straw, and like like things like that. So
Love that.
those kind of details that I he obviously had accumulated over years and years and years, but I had to put down to paper and like kind of make a little bit of a more robust operating playbook for.
No, I love that. And I guess, after you guys closed the business, was there anything surprising? Maybe even pre-close and then post that you weren't expecting that maybe you didn't catch during diligence, but good or bad, I guess.
Yeah. So I was super lucky that there wasn't any big negative surprises post acquisition. There was some during diligence, there were some issues with the way that the inventory was treated, and this gets into the nitty gritty of it. But basically, on their book value, they had the cost of the inventory from the supplier, but they weren't taking into account the cost of getting it into the warehouse. Some of which can be capitalized, but some of it like they just treat as expenses, and so that got really like murky of like how much the inventory is actually valued at and all those kind of things. It wasn't a huge like deal at the end of the day. It was just like something we didn't prepare for. Neither I nor the sellers like even thought about before we went into the like final negotiations over inventory. So that was like one of the many weird accounting things that I've had to like figure out since then. But then post acquisition, I'd say like it's been mostly upside. The team that I have in place is better than I expected. Like they're a really talented group of folks that like I could not operate the business without. So that has I've heard of horror stories where the operations manager is touted as this really like great person that is really interested in sticking on post acquisition, and then you get in there and everybody leaves, and that was not the case for me. The folks in the warehouse were really happy to or I think happy to make the transition. They tell me there anyways. So that's been a really positive upside for me. And then the other thing that felt like a kind of a crisis at first was we actually had two reps of our biggest like sales reps that both had kind of like family and health issues like right after I purchased the business. And so those weren't like surprises in the sense of things that you could have discovered doing due diligence, but they were kind of okay, like we really had to figure out how I really had to get into the details of how these folks operate so I can kind of carry the load while they're out recovering, or one of them eventually just retired, and we had to figure out how to transition his accounts over. So there were some immediate like fire drills, but nothing like negatively surprising about the inventory or the financials, or anything of that nature. So I was lucky there, because there certainly could have been a lot of things that I wouldn't have known, I didn't know until I got in there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, what were you focused on, I guess, the first 90 days, six
Yeah.
months? I mean, you're, I guess, almost a little over 6 months in, right?
Yeah, I'm at, let's see, it's December. I'll be at 9 months in on the 15th. So but like it feels like 5 years. It is
Yeah,
which I'm
no,
sure
you're
you can relate to. Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious, like what were you focusing on the first 90 days? You had the sellers for 4 weeks.
Yep.
When you say staggered, does that mean you got them each for 4 weeks or
Yep. Got them each for 4 weeks. And then the operations manager did 8 weeks, essentially, because we weren't offboarding, but we were uh he was working during that time. But it was, I would say, like, one, just on the seller transition, I wanted like as much seller transition as possible, and like I quickly like realized that that wasn't the way to go. Like, having a defined and short period to give all the important information, and then a pathway to like get new like questions that come up and all that, I think is a much better approach. We were kind of struggling for things to talk about like a couple weeks in, towards the end of the transition period, and you get into these weird situations where like I felt like I didn't want to offend them by being like, I have nothing else to learn from you right now, we can just cancel the meeting. But also, like, I wanted to dive into the details myself and start to make decisions, rather than like having them work on them with me. And so like that was one thing that I had assumed, that the more transition time you get, the better, and it turned out not to be true. Just from a like an operating perspective. And then I was just eager to get going and working the business. So I tried to learn the things that um I knew no one else could do, or I didn't feel comfortable anyone else doing for the first couple of months, and that went against my intuition of like learning how the business operates at a ground level first. Like, I wanted to know everything from A to Z, but I kind of realized pretty quickly that if I did that, I wouldn't do all the other things that the two owners had been doing that kept the business running. One of which was like keeping inventory in stock, which is um, can be difficult when you're working with long supply chains from China. So um, I quickly went to that, built a bunch of my own like reporting around inventory levels, and like forecasting, and all this the best I could in a short period of time, just to make sure that we were good and there were no fire drills for the first 8 months of operating, and mostly succeeded from that regard. There were a couple of supplier issues and things we've had, but otherwise has been lucky there. And then I still haven't really gotten to the like the nuts and bolts of the operating business. The thing I started working on right after that was customer acquisition and retention. So I had kind of alluded to this, but we pretty much operated a like basically a take it or leave it model for customer retention. So we have a team of reps that go out and service our customers. But a lot of our customers will come directly to the office and order through us. And we had no process for following up with them when they ordered. We had no post first purchase follow up process. And so getting ahead on some of those reps or some of those customers, and trying to understand and build on that process, was my second priority, because we need the inventory first. And I mentioned that one of the reps retired, so we had to sprint to make sure that we could capture all his accounts before he kind of went off the grid, and carry those people and make sure that they were supported. So that's been the other thing I focused on up through now, and we're really just we had like kind of a sticks and band-aid process, but our next 2 months is going to be focused on something a lot more robust, so that when we go into the peak selling season next year, we can follow up with those folks. But yeah, inventory and customers were the two things that I ended up focusing on, and inventory and customers were the two things that the previous owners had done, so it kind of made sense.
no, that's great that you're able to not have to work, I guess, in the business in terms of actually
Yeah.
running a lot of the day to day and could, be like kind of one step above starting day one, which is a great place
Yeah.
to be in.
Yeah, it in like I that was one of the kind of positive sides that I was talking about, where like everybody can run things without me getting directly involved, and frankly, like run them better without me getting directly involved. And so there's things that like they like to clue me in on, and I really try to stay close to customer anecdotes because we have so many of them, and there's so many like individual voices out there that I do have them come and tell me about anytime we've had like a positive or negative like direct customer interaction. But other than that, I've been really out of the day to day, which has been again like a positive upside for me.
And have you, I guess, have you seen any of these initiatives, pan out so far? When is the peak season, by the way, for hats?
So we see most of our buys come in like January, February, March timeframe, and then peak like direct to or peak to customer sales starts in April and goes all the way through September. One of the other things that we did, and I put a little bit too much on my plate, was developing a winter line that is just launching right now, but that was like biting off more than I could do kind of early on. So we're trying to balance out that peak season, but um, we start to see benefits from the inventory has been working well. I've heard anecdotally that we're in much better, like we didn't have any out of stock reporting, so it's hard to say, but we're in much better inventory positions across product categories than we were last year. And part of that, frankly, is just like infusions of cash to help with the working capital. And that kind of goes back to this whole like it was actually better in hindsight to have a business that I could like if it's a $10 million business, like my working capital infusions, it could be a drop in the bucket, it's not gonna do anything. But here it actually can make a difference in terms of how much inventory we hold. So that's been beneficial. We've heard good things from customers and our rep teams on that. And then we did have a lot of what I called like dive and save customer recovery when we had our one rep with his health issues, and then the other one retire. We were able to get these kind of stale accounts reactivated at a about like a 60% rate. And
Wow.
yeah, it was so, and that was like that was the thesis behind what we're doing in 2025, where like all you need to do is contact these like in this kind of goes back to the model. We are not an important part of Joe's Ace Hardware. We are a periphery accessory item that they want to spend as little time thinking about as possible, and like we need to do the work to make sure that they can do that and not have to like spend time worrying about our product. And so if we put in the effort and make the call or send the email or remind them, or send the rep out there, or however we go about doing it, it pays dividends really quickly. And that has been the basis of a lot of our financial planning for 2025 of what happens if we change customer retention rate from X to Y. How will that affect the business? And it's been a really positive story so far. And it's a little early to know because these were kind of direct dive and saves, but we're hoping to retain a much higher percentage of customers next year. And if we do that, it builds a really sustainable business over time. So it's something that I think the previous owners weren't aware of the capabilities technology wise to be able to do that now because the CRM work is relatively new. When they had bought the business, CRMs didn't even really exist. And so it's a relatively new like technological innovation, I guess you could say, that's going to help us manage our customers at a better scale than we could previously. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm learning a bunch about it. I had no experience in CRMs previously, but I used to make fun of all my friends who worked at Salesforce, and now I ask them questions.
I love that. I mean, it's great that you were able to implement something and see results so quickly. I mean, a lot of folks talk about, year after they buy the business, they see a J curve because something goes, things just don't go according to plan
Yep.
or um whatever. Have you seen that at all? What have you, has the business been pretty stable since, has it grown? What does that look like?
It's been down this year, and that was expected. Like we did, as I mentioned, came off of a little bit of a pandemic bump, and I had kind of planned for that. I planned for flat growth, but we were down a little bit, mostly because of these external like sales team factors. And we can model it out by looking at the number of accounts that we typically retain versus the ones that we didn't this year and all that. So I wasn't too worried about it. It's disheartening to see because you kind of want to, you obviously want to show like your immediate impact year over year, but I torturing numbers was like something I learned really, really deeply at Amazon. And so I've looked at this like 19 different ways and looked at what would happen if we didn't do any of this and what would happen if we did like half of it. And I can say that like we're a lot better off because of the changes that we made than we would have been otherwise. Which at least I tell myself. But we've all the main reason for that is softness in hardware sales. And so that business in general has just been seen a hangover from the pandemic. All the customers I talk to just say that um, foot traffic is down a little bit because folks aren't in there buying lumber and things like that the same way that they were. And then willingness to spend also took a little bit of a dip this year. And some of that I think is related to like we sell in a lot of red states and a lot of red areas. Typically like customer sentiment or consumer sentiment goes down when other parties are in office. And so there was some of that playing into. And then the other thing that I learned was like election years are generally bad. Is what I've learned in retail. Apparently, like it was so distributed at Amazon, and I only went through a couple of them while we were there, but um, that I never really saw that kind of change. But on a much smaller scale, it becomes a lot more obvious. In talking with some like hardware retailers, they just say, yeah, people are nervous. They don't want to. They're not splashing out on things that they otherwise would have. Just because of like the air of anxiety around, which I thought was a really like I always like kind of like laughed when like people would talk about like vibes in the economy, and then I was like, this is like a straight example of like just vibes in the economy, and it is having a direct impact on the business. So that was a little bit disappointing, but we saw a really big influx in our travel segment. So the diversification is working the way my thesis kind of predicted it to. So I think we're set to have a pretty good year next year. But it was like seeing that first year over year, like running the calculations because we had this like shoddy QuickBooks instance, like putting it all together and then finally getting the result and going down to the tab at the bottom right and being like, oh crap, like we're down was like a pretty bad first feeling.
But at least, it seems like you feel like you've bought a fundamentally sound business.
Yeah.
And I feel like
Yeah.
that is key. And, sometimes people buy duds completely,
Yeah.
or like this wasn't a real business to begin with. So it sounds like that wasn't the case.
Yeah. It has a lot of potential to it. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is like this is stuff that we can do. Like we can see kind of to the beginning of our conversation, like we can see the immediate impact of the work that we're doing on customers calling in, customers giving feedback, and then like our end customer sales in like direct to customer business is starting to bear some fruit as well. And like that lever is something that I've always wanted to be like in more and more control of, and being able to see that work is like why I'm doing this, I guess.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's huge and I'm sure very gratifying. I'm curious, we spoke a little bit about buying out of state, started sort of hit you, but what's that been like? How have you navigated running you're in Seattle right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
The business is in Alabama. How have you navigated that? How's that been going?
Yeah. It's been good. I'd say it's 90% good, 10% challenging. It's all challenging, but um the thankfully, like I was kind of mentioning, I don't need to be there to do the day-to-day stuff all that much. It's helpful to answer questions quickly, but a lot of those questions that people want answered quickly, like don't need to be answered quickly. And it that part has been semi-seamless. We are a small team. We have anywhere, depending on seasonality, from 7 to 12 employees. And so if someone is out sick, like we had some seemingly like people get sick or like have issues around the holiday. If some of the staff is sick, we it can affect us directly, and we have to make some like immediate changes to make sure that product gets out the door and that we're serving our customers. And so this week in particular has been one where it's been challenging, or I've had to be on the phone constantly with the office, just making sure that they have what they need and they're supported. We have a truck incoming, delivering some product, and we don't have a couple of our staff isn't going to be there, so we need to find kind of like a temp agency to help us with some labor for that. And so there's kind of these little fire drills that pop up occasionally. But for the most part, it's been really beneficial to be able to spend time back with family at home. I have a partner out here who has been very, very supportive about me spending a bunch of time in Alabama. And it's been nice to be able to kind of spend time back here. I don't think this would have been super tenable otherwise.
Did you
And
actually
then
get a place out there?
yeah,
Like what? Okay.
I
And were you
have
living
there's a
out there
side
for a
story we can go about
while?
this about the boa constrictor that lives in the house that I'm living in right now, but that's a whole nother
Oh,
like
well. Give
that
give us the 30
the
seconds.
30-second. I'm renting from a herpetologist who works at the University of Auburn. And she and her husband, who is an insect scientist, I don't remember what that one is, own a 6-foot boa constrictor named David Boa, who I am taking care of with the help of some neighborhood kids who are feeding it right now. So that is it. Like it does not get much more Alabama than the kind of setup I'm living in right now. But I'm renting a house there. I've been renting mostly furnished places. There's a lot of traveling, like the professors I'm renting from are on sabbatical. There's a lot of students that will go on like quarter long trips, and I rented out a condo from parents of one of those students. So I don't think, and I've been clear with my team that like my plan is not to like relocate long term in Alabama. But I'm there for as long as I need to be until we get something really solid under our feet, and they feel confident about me not being in the building, because that's I think a lot of what I provide when I'm there is just like I'm here if you need questions or you have questions. That's been mixed. I mean, moving from
Have you been back and forth? Like, did you first spend a couple weeks there? Like, how have you actually
yeah,
navigated
I've been
that?
back and forth. So I started, I'd come back once a month for a weekend. That was tough.
That's
Just
tough.
to like catch up and like see my parents and all that kind of stuff. But I felt like I owed it, or didn't owe it, but like my partner deserved that I go back there and help her out and see her. And she works in office in Seattle. It is much harder for her to do the reverse. And so she's offered to a couple times, but I like for a couple reasons, like I prefer to just be back in Seattle. It's really time consuming to drive from Atlanta to Auburn and then do that again at the end of a weekend. So it makes a lot more sense for me to head up there. But yeah, I was doing a flight back every couple of weeks for the weekend. We've been able to extend that to about a week per month that I'm out of the office and back either here or traveling to see customers. And then the goal for March, when my lease expires at this current place, is to do 50/50. And so we'll see. Like I said, it works 90% of the time. And then those couple days you're like, oh man, I really wish I was there. But it's also similar to the like starting to operate the business from the beginning. It's forcing me to find solutions to this problem, because I don't want to just band-aid this by me being there physically, when ultimately like our goal is not to like only distribute out of the Alabama warehouse. Like we have a bunch of customers in California, we have a bunch of customers in Texas. It would make sense for us to locate some of our inventory closer to those customers. And like me being wrapped up in one location is, like I said, kind of like a band-aid. And so I'm forcing the issue a little bit, but it's partially for my sanity and partially I think for the benefit of the business.
I mean, good for you for doing that. I mean, that's not easy when you have a partner and a family in a completely different across the country, really,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. We've
um,
gotten good at the time zone. She calls me when she's coming back from work, and we have it like but we've had to get like really scheduled about it. Like we maintain a calendar of like when we're going to see each other and the different like events that we have coming up. But it's, it's a lot more work in a good way, like from like this is like the relationship counseling part of it, but it's a lot more like intentional work than I think I would have like we would have spent on it in the past. And I think it's actually been like weirdly beneficial from that perspective. The distance has been hard, but the clearer communication about what we can and can't do has been positive. So
no, that's great. Silver lining, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is this a goal for March is 50/50? Is sort of, let's say, a year from now or 2 years from now is the goal that you're not sort of spending you're spending the majority of time at home, or what's kind of.
Yeah, I'd say like the most likely scenario is like relocating to somewhere closer to customers where we'd also have a second warehouse. So like the example that sticks out of my mind is we should have a warehouse in Texas, and we all, most like 40% of our customer base is in Texas. More than 50% of our sales are out of Texas. And so it makes sense to have somebody on the ground there. And it's a lot closer to, we have five or more than that, like 9 or 10 trade shows every year. Most of them are in Texas.
Mhm.
And it can be really that ironically, like that travel is a lot more jarring than like traveling back to work from home where you're many hours on a plane and then in some sort of environment where it's not really conducive to working. But having somebody there would be beneficial. I think the plan is to have some sort of physical location in Texas and then kind of operate out of there. And then we'll maintain the Alabama warehouse for our like southeast and eastern customers. It's like I said, staffed with a really good group of people. It's in a pretty low rent location. It's really we are kind of a pillar of the community, and I wouldn't want to kind of move away on that. So I think the hope is that we expand enough where we can justify that to happen.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess one follow-up on the trade shows, have you done some of that already? Has that been super impactful in the business? I know a lot of folks, don't want to do those types of
Yeah.
in-person marketing events. I'm curious, how that's going.
I prefer, and I hope the retailers are listening. I prefer for me personally to not have to be there, just because it is like a full day on of me writing orders, which is something we like on a typical day we'd outsource to like our front of house staff. Like it's not something that I need to like have experience in doing. I love talking to the customers there and like understanding more about the business. I mentioned it like I think earlier on that I'm pretty skeptical when it comes to like just like business in general. And so I am still like seeking the validation that our products are working really well for them. We're servicing their needs. I'm always asking customers what we can do better. And being able to get directly in front of them in a continuous basis has been really helpful for me to understand where we need to go in 2025. And part of it led to the realization of just like the customer retention question where folks would come up and they'd say, "Yeah, I ordered from you last year, but like I didn't know how to order in the interim," and it just like had a kind of a light bulb moment there. So they are super valuable. I would love to be more of a like have more time to just spend with customers rather than like writing orders and having to go through that whole process. And then a lot of our business gets done through trade shows, which we went to them at Amazon. We rarely did deals there when we were buying for baby products or buying for personal computers or anything like that. We usually used it as like a meeting forum. And so I was surprised about how many, I mean, these are also small independent dealers, like they're coming to buy at a deal, they're coming to mark off their inventory list and they're coming to buy. So it is important that we go to them. I'm hoping to staff it with people that would be less distracted than I am and can really focus on serving the customers. And I can just spend time like actually understanding the needs a little bit better and trying to learn more from them.
No, that's super interesting. I know we're way over on time, so thanks for bearing with
No
me.
worries.
I guess final question,
Yeah.
any sort of any sort of final words of wisdom for people that are, where you were maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago, just embarking on this journey of acquiring a business and, is this everything you've kind of expected it to be, worse, better?
Yeah.
Curious.
I can start with the second part. Like I keep saying, like, yes, it is. Even when I have like we have the issues with like folks are sick this week and they can't come up, like these are like this isn't maybe necessarily the level of granularity I wanted to get into, but this is what I wanted. Like I signed up to like work directly with these teams, like have a like physical touch point with our customers when we go and distribute the product to them. So it has been everything I asked for. And some of that is more painful than I expected, and a lot of it is a lot more rewarding than I would have thought. So that part's been like would absolutely do this again, would have no regrets on this side. The advice that I've given to a couple of people that have like reached out to me is don't overthink, like at least the starting phases of it. Like you want to have your thesis set up, you want to have your criteria ready to go. But a lot of folks will get in kind of analysis paralysis, and they'll spend a lot of time thinking about how they're going to write an email to a broker and or to a small business owner, and like the reality is there's a like 0.1% chance that that broker is going to be the one who introduces you to the business you're going to buy. And so you just had to like get started. And I had no deal experience. I learned a lot of what I needed to ask by just talking to the brokers. Like they want to sell a business. If you present yourself as a qualified candidate, and don't like go about wasting their time. And the other thing that I've said is like give helpful feedback to their sims and their marketing materials and tell them why you're passing on something. They'll give you like a lot of advice about how to go about doing this, and what they're expecting to see from buyers and where you're positioned versus other folks so you can improve in the future. But I spent a lot of time making sure my website was really good and making sure all these other things that didn't matter so much at the end of the day, mostly because I was nervous about getting started. But I've told folks like, if you're kind of on the fence about it, like it's not a jump in the pool kind of thing. Like you can dip your toe in and build incrementally, and that's how you should do it. So that's the advice that I've mostly shared.
No, that's great advice. And I think I see that a lot with the analysis paralysis with people just getting so um just the building the website is one that I see
Yeah,
a lot of people spending like months. I
yeah,
built the website. It's like,
yeah.
great. Have you spoken to anyone? Any
Yeah,
sellers?
have you called anybody yet? Yeah, it is, and I mean, it's the harder step. And I absolutely get. I mean, I did it. I understand why.
Yeah.
But I think if there's an actionable piece of feedback I could give, I think that's the one I would give to most folks.
No, that's great advice. Well, look, Eric, thank you so much for your time today. Really, really appreciate it. I guess final question. If people want to reach out after listening to this, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn at Eric Bauer, under Turner Hats, or Turner Hat Company. There's only one of us, and that is me. And then also Eric ERIC at turnerhat.com. You can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to give advice or chat. I've had a couple folks reach out in the past, and we've had some really nice conversations. So absolutely happy to pick up a call or go back and forth over email, whatever folks are interested in.
That's very generous of you. Thank you so much, Eric, for your time today, and excited to see where this takes you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you so much, Helen. This has been great.